Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Nun Amud Beis, 50b of Maseches Kiddushin. We're starting from the second to last line of the page, where the Gemara says Gufa. The Mishnah, just a few lines up, had talked about a case where a man tries to betroth a woman and her daughter at the same time. You can't be married to a woman and her daughter. You can't marry your wife's daughter. They also talked about the case of a man trying to betroth a woman and her sister at the same time. You can't be married to two sisters. So the Mishnah said Kiddushin doesn't work for either of them. And the Gemara explained, Rava said that the Mishnah is based on the logic of Rabbah. Rabbah tells us a rule that Kol she'eno b'zeh achar zeh afilu b'vas achas eino. Anything that won't work one after the other also won't work at the same time. So, since if I would betroth a woman, that would work. But if I would then try to betroth her sister or her daughter, that would not work. So, it doesn't work one after the other. So too, bivas achas eino, it won't work at the same time. Meaning, the truth is in either direction. If a man betroths a woman and then tries to betroth her mother, it won't work. Right? Or the mother and then the daughter, either direction doesn't work. So since it doesn't work one after the other, it doesn't work at the same time simultaneously, and in that case, neither of them are betrothed, there's no Kiddushin whatsoever. So the Gemara now is going to examine the rule of Rabbah that anything that doesn't work one after the other also won't work at the same time. So the Gemara says, Gufa. Let's examine these words themselves. Amar Rabbah, Rabbah said, Kol she'eno b'zeh achar zeh, anything that doesn't work one after the other, afilu b'vas achas eino, also won't work at the same time. So the Gemara says, Eisvei Abaye. Abaye asked a contradiction from a brisa. Top of the next page, the brisa says as follows: Hamarbe b'maiser peirosav. Hamarbe b'maiser. If a person overdoes it on the meiser, the tithe of their produce. So one is required to take meiser from produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael, and let's say a person is counting out their meiser. Meiser is 10%. So, and it's specifically 10%, right? Unlike meiser ksafim, when we tithe our income. So that works differently. That's maybe a custom, but it's not a Torah law, and it's tzedakah, and the person, is allowed to give more than 10%. Again, that's its own topic, but the main difference really is that when we're dealing with produce, so the produce is tevel. It's forbidden to eat that produce until one takes the meiser. So if a person has his tevel here, and he's counting out meiser, and if he takes more than 10%, so he takes, he counts out, let's say, 4 stalks of grain, and then he makes the 5th one meiser. That's not 10%, that's 20%. So the brisa says, peirosav misukanim, so it works to make the fruit, or in my case the wheat, permitted. In other words, that tevel, that produce that was forbidden to eat is now permitted. There was meiser taken from it. It was more than meiser, more than 10%. But u'maisrosav mikulkalin. But the meiser itself is mikulkal, it's ruined, because within that meiser is also produce that has not had 10% taken from it, has not had meiser taken from it, because we started with a pile of grain. The whole pile was tevel, was forbidden to consume. And now he took 10% on some of it, but he took more than 10%. He took a fifth. He took 20%. So only 10% is considered meiser. So of that 20% that he took, half of it is not meiser. And really it needs meiser taken from it. It's tevel. So we have now that in that 1/5, that 20% that he took, a mix. He separated this 20% as meiser, but it's a mix-up really. It's only half of it. Only 10% of the original produce is meiser, and is the tithe, and the rest is tevel still. So this produce is really a mix-up of meiser and tevel, and he would have to really, there's ways to resolve it, but right now it's a mixture. So meiserosa mikul kol, his meiser is ruined for now. So the Gemara asks, Vamai, why is it ruined? Nema, or why is it a mix of meiser and tevel? Nema, we should say, kol she'eno b'zeh achar zeh, anything that wouldn't work one after the other, afilu b'vas achas eno, also doesn't work at the same time. In other words, what happened here? He counted out 80%, right? He counted out 4 portions, and now that 5th portion he made meiser. Now, I guess we can, let's divide it into percentages. He counted out 80% of his produce, and then the next 10% he declared meiser. And then the next 10% he also declared meiser. Now, that second 10% that he declared meiser, is it meiser? It's not, because it wasn't taking as meiser on anything. It wasn't taking as a tithe against anything. In order to really be meiser, it has to be that it was the tithe of something. So if he would do this one after the other, instead of taking that 20% all at once, he would take 10% of it, and then the next 10%, so it wouldn't work. And yet we're saying, so this is the case of Eino b'zeh achar zeh, it wouldn't work one after the other. And so according to Rabba's rule, anything that doesn't work one after the other doesn't work at the same time either. So when he makes that whole 20% meiser, it shouldn't work at all. None of it should be meiser. We're saying that it works to make it meiser, and the produce is permitted now, the rest of the produce, just this 20% that he took has a problem because it's a mixture of meiser and tevel. It shouldn't be a problem. It should be that the whole thing didn't work. Anything that won't work one after the other, 10% and then 10%, it won't work. The second 10% wouldn't be meiser. So it can't work at the same time. Neither of the piles should be meiser, or neither side of this 10% neither side of this 20% should be meiser. None of it should be meiser. So the Gemara says, Amar lei, so he responded, Rabbah responded, Shani meiser di'isei l'chatzayim. Meiser is different because you can have partial meiser. You can have that any individual piece of grain, half of it is meiser, and half of it is not. And so, over here, what's actually going on, the Gemara is saying, at least how Rashi learns, what's actually is going on here is that this 20% that we're saying it's meiser, it's a mixture of meiser and tevel. What we really mean is that every piece of grain is half meiser and half not. So it does work at the same time. It does work simultaneously, meaning there's nothing that necessitates anything to be one after the other here. A person counts out 80% and then makes the next 20% meiser. So it's true, you can't make 20% meiser, you can only make 10%. But the way that we'll look at it is that 20%, half of every piece of grain, is meiser. And so that's why over here we'll say that it's meiser. as opposed to in the case that we were discussing, where he was Mekadesh, a woman and her daughter. So there's no way for this to work simultaneously, and he can't be married to both. So over there, that's where we'll apply the rule of if it won't work one after the other. That's certain, and therefore it also can't work at the same time where it's two women. But by the Meiser, when he overdoes it, when he over tithes the Meiser, we have a way that it can take effect in a halachically acceptable way. It can take effect that I guess in other words, just to make this more clear, we can do this in a way that even one after the other would be okay, because if we look at this, we have this 20% of this grain, and only half of it could be Meiser, only 10% could be Meiser. But the way that he could do it is take the first half and make half of those pieces Meiser. Every half of each of those kernels, right, could be Meiser. And then he could do the next half and make half of those kernels Meiser. And that means that he's only taken 10% altogether. So there's a way for this to work, bizach one after the other. And so it can also work at the same time, and we'll look at it in that way. But by these two women, a mother and a daughter, there's no way for it to work one after the other. You can't be half married. You can't be married to both. So be half married to one, half married to the other. You can't do that. So that's where the rule will apply, because it can't be done one after the other in any way. So too, it can't be done at the same time. So the Gemara says, okay, fine. What about Vari Meiser Behema? What about Meiser Behema? So there's another kind of Meiser. Meiser Behema, tithing one's animals that are born in that year. So a person has to tithe them and bring every 10th animal as a carbon from his cattle. And so over there, the Gemara says, Deleko lachatzayin. It can't be done as you can't make half an animal Meiser, right? As opposed to the grain, we're saying you could make half of it Meiser, half a kernel, half a stalk. But an animal, when you're tithing animals, you can't do a half animal Meiser. And it doesn't work one after the other, meaning you can't make your two animals in a row Meiser. The way that you take Meiser from your animals is you have them walk by, and you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The 10th one is Meiser. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, but that's how you have to do it. And if you would say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, this one's Meiser, and then 11, that one's Meiser, that shouldn't work. It's Leka b'zachar zeh. V'amar Rava, or Amar Rabba, and yet Rabba says, if Yatsu Shnayim Ba'asiri, if two animals came out at the 10th spot at the same time, so you did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 9, and then you're ready to count the 10th animal, and two animals walk by at the same time, V'karan Asiri, and the guy said, you're both the 10th. Sorry, V'karan Asiri, and he said, you're the 10th to both of them. So what's the halacha? Rabba says, Asiri v'achadasar mu'ravim zeh b'zeh. Both the 10th and 11th. One of them is the 10th, one of them is the 11th, really. 11 animals have walked by now, but we don't know which one is the Meiser one and which one's not. So Rabba says, they're mu'ravim zeh b'zeh, they're mixed together now. So you're kind of stuck. You don't know which one is the Meiser one and which one you're supposed to bring for the carbon, and which one is not. The one that's not, we would just say it's a shlamim. It's brought as a carbon, but it's not Meiser. And you have to know which one's which. So actually in that case, we wouldn't be able to bring them as the carbon. There's a process that you have to follow, but again, not for right now. but they, what do we have here? We have that you have two animals come at the same time as number 10. So, but it's not a 10th, right? It's one of them is going to be the 11th. And he declares them both Meiser. So Rabbah says it's a big mix-up. We don't know which one's Meiser and which one's not. The Gemara asks, or the Gemara's question is, why are they both Meiser? You couldn't have made them Meiser one after the other. If you would say the 10th one is Meiser, the 11th one is Meiser, the 11th one wouldn't be Meiser. So, so we should apply the rule that anything that doesn't work one after the other doesn't work at the same time, and neither of them should be Meiser. So the Gemara answers, Shani Meiser Behema Diise Betos. No, Meiser Behema is different, because Meiser Behema works even in error. What do we mean by that? It's not because we're learning a Mishnah. Kara Letishi Asiri. Let's say the Mishnah says, if he's counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8, and he loses track, and at number 9 he says 10. You're the 10th. And he declares the 9th one as Meiser. And then he thought he was up to 10, so sorry. Fine, that's one scenario. La Siri Tashi, let's say he does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and he loses track, and he thinks he's still up to 9, and he calls the 10th one the 9th one. So we have one case he calls the 9th one the 10th one, or he calls the 10th one the 9th one, La Chadasar Asiri, or he calls the 11th one the 10th one. So, Shlashtar Mikudashin, they're all Kodesh, they're all holy. They're all dedicated as Karbanos, and they're not all going to be Meiser. Only the 10th one will be Meiser, but I think the other two would have the sanctity of a carbon. They have to be brought as a peace offering, a carbon shlamim. Just check Rashi for a second. Yeah, so actually the end of that Mishnah, Rashi tells us that the 9th one that he declared as Meiser, so they should wait till it gets a moment blemish and can't be brought as a carbon. The 10th one, even though he called it the 9th one, it's Meiser, it is the 10th one. That will be the Meiser. And the 11th one should be brought as a Shlamim. And it says the Mishnah learns it out from verses. Fine. But the point is that that he made an error there. He called the 10th one the 9th one. He didn't call it the 10th one. And yet, it's still considering Meiser. And he called the 11th one Meiser. And calling the 11th one Meiser doesn't affect the 10th one, even if it was the same case. The 10th one is still the Meiser. So even though he did this whole thing in error, he called the wrong things, we see from the Mishnah that when it comes to Meiser, it can still have its name Meiser. So the Gemara is saying Meiser is different. It can be done in error. And so over here is an exception. We won't apply the rule of anything that doesn't work one after the other doesn't work at once because there we're working by different rules there. They actually do work even one after the other. One it's bitos, one it's done in error, and so Meiser basically works by different rules, and that's where and that's why in our case, in Rabbah's case, where two animals went by at the same time, and he said they're Meiser, we say that even though you couldn't make them Meiser one after the other, but at the same time it will still work. One of them will be Meiser, and we don't know which one, they're a mix-up, but that's special for Meiser, because Meiser works even when done in error. As opposed to Kiddushin, Kiddushin will not work in error. You have to intend for Kiddushin, and it has to be, the person has to know who they're doing Kiddushin to, and has to mean it when they say it, so when they give it. So there we can apply our rule that if it doesn't work one after the other, it won't work at the same time. Okay, then the Gemara asks, fine, so we don't have a question from Meiser. The Gemara asks, Hare Toda. What about the carbon Toda? So a carbon Toda is a Thanksgiving offering, and in addition to the animal offering, there are 40 loaves that are brought along with it. 10 are a bread type of loaf, 30 are matzah type of loaf, 3 different kinds. But there's 40 loaves altogether brought with it. So ask the Gemara, Hare Toda, Delesa Betaos. It doesn't work by accident to dedicate those loaves. Delesa Nami B'Zacharza. And it wouldn't work one after the other. If a person's bringing a carbon Toda, and they dedicate 40 loaves as the melachos, the loaves that come with the carbon Toda. And then they dedicate another 40. So their second 40 will not be dedicated. They're not part of the carbon. There's only 40. The Itmar and Yaga was said, Toda shenishchata shmonim chalos. What if a person did slaughter their carbon Toda with the intent of having 40 loaves with it? 80 loaves with it. With the intent of having 80 loaves. Double what they're supposed to have. Chizkiya amar kadshila arbayim mitoch shmonim. Chizkiya says 40 out of the 80 worked. Rabbi Yochanan amar lo kadshila arbayim mitoch shmonim. And Rabbi Yochanan says that none of them are holy, are sanctified, are dedicated as the loaves. So Rabbi Yochanan actually sounds like Rabbah. Rabbi Yochanan is saying it doesn't work. None of them work. But Chizkiya seems like he holds that it did work. Is Rabbah arguing on Chizkiya in this case? When Rabbah says this rule, Chizkiya said that if you dedicate 80 loaves, 40 of them work. Oh, but if you would do it one after the other, it wouldn't work. If you would do 40 followed by 40, none of them would work. They wouldn't work. So b'vas achas, it shouldn't work either. At the same time, none of them should be dedicated. So it seems, is Rabbah arguing on Chizkiya and going with Rabbi Yochanan? So the Gemara says, Lav itmar Allah. Didn't we already say about that? Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said as follows. Hakol modim. Everybody agrees. Kol hechad amar kachi la arbayim mitoch shmonim. Kachi. If the guy said 40 out of 80 should be dedicated, everybody agrees that works. He said 40. 40 out of 80. That's good. That's what we need, 40. Lo yikteshu arbayim elohim king kachi shmonim. If he says, I'm only going to sanctify these 40 if all 80 are holy. I'm not settling for 40, I want 80. So then, everybody agrees it doesn't work. Because you can't dedicate 80. You have to dedicate 40. Lo nechaku ela bistam. What they're arguing about is what happens if he just dedicates 80, but he doesn't say 40 out of 80. He doesn't say, I'm doing 80 and it's all or nothing. He just says, Stam, I'm dedicating 80 loaves. How do we look at his intent? Mar savar lachrayus kamachavin. Chizkiya, who said it works, it doesn't work because he's not concerned about Rabbah. He's certainly concerned about Rabbah. If you would try, if you really meant to do them all at the same time, Chizkiya would agree it doesn't work. If it doesn't work one after the other, if you really meant to dedicate all 80 at the same time, it would not work. Even Chizkiya will agree. That's what the Gemara is suggesting. So why does he say that it works? The guy dedicated 80, so why does it work? Says Chizkiya, no, he's not really dedicating 80. What he means is, I'm dedicating 40, and the other 40 are backup. They're the achrayas. They'll be backup. That's what he meant. And so that works, because he didn't really dedicate all 80. He didn't do them all bivas achas at one time. So that works. He dedicated 40, the other 40 are backup. So that's why he said it works. Umar Savar, and the other opinion, Rabbi Yochanan, said it doesn't work. He says, no, that's not what he meant. L'karban gadol kol mechaber. He meant to bring 80. And if he meant to bring 80, then it doesn't. None of it works because of our rule. If it doesn't work b'zeh, if it doesn't work one after the other, you couldn't do 40 followed by 40. You can only have 40 for your karban. So if you do it all at once, 80 all at once, you're left with nothing. Okay, so the rule stands. The rule of anything that doesn't work one after the other, won't work at the same time, has stood the test of these questions. But now the Gemara goes back to Rava's explanation. And Rava was the one who brought in the explanation of Rava. Back in last week's Amud, when the Mishnah said that if a guy tries to betroth two sisters at the same time, it doesn't work, Rava said, Rava said, the logic is because of Rabba's statement, that if it doesn't work one after the other, since you can't marry one sister after the other, if you try and marry them at the same time, that doesn't work either. So the Gemara asks, V'Rava lama le'lishnui kirabba, why does Rava have to explain it based on Rabba? Tepuk lei, he should be able to explain it based on his own teaching, which the Gemara is going to elaborate on in a moment, his own teaching, which is Kiddushin she'en mesurin lebiyaninu, that Kiddushin that cannot be followed by bia, by intercourse, doesn't work as Kiddushin. In other words, here we have, he tries to betroth two sisters. So let's say the Kiddushin would take effect. But now he's not allowed to have relations with his wife's sister, and each of these sisters is his wife's sister. So he would never be able to have relations with them. And Rava teaches us a rule that a Kiddushin that cannot be followed by intercourse is not a good Kiddushin. So that should be the reason. Why does Rava have to come on to Rabba to explain the Mishnah and say, it's because of the rule that anything doesn't work one after the other, can't work at the same time. So that's why the Kiddushin can't take effect. Say a different rule. Your own rule. Rava has a rule that a Kiddushin that cannot lead to Bia is not a good Kiddushin. And here, even if the Kiddushin would take effect, it wouldn't be able to lead to Bia because each of these women would be his wife's sister. So that should be the reason why the Kiddushin doesn't take effect. So why didn't Rava give that reason? So the Gemara says, no, it's true, it's a good reason. L'dvar of Rami bar Chama kamar. He was just coming to explain Rami bar Chama. Rami bar Chama was the Gemara's first attempt back on Nur Amud Beis on 50b, when the Gemara first asked, how do we know, where do we get this from, that if a guy tries to betroth two sisters, it doesn't work. So the Gemara said, where do we know it from? And Rami bar Chama said, because the pasuk says that you shouldn't take your wife's sister, and he understood that to mean that if you try to take your wife and a wife and her sister at the same time, it doesn't work. Now the Gemara asked on that, it doesn't sound like that's the case, because the pasuk there then goes on to talk about kares, and kares would only be relevant if he was first married to one of them and then had relations with the other. But if he tried to marry both of them, he's not married to either of them. So if he would then have relations with one of them, it wouldn't be kares because it's not his wife's sister because he doesn't have a wife. So the Gemara rejected Rami bar Chama's reading of the pasuk and said, no, the pasuk has to be talking about where he tried to marry one after the other. And he married one, and then he tried to marry your sister, and that doesn't work, and if you have relations to her, it will be kares. So that's where Rava then swooped in and said, but if you want to still be able, Rami bar Chama, if you want to still be able to learn from that pasuk, this is how you have to do it. The pasuk says you can't marry one sister after the other, and Rava has a rule that anything that doesn't work one after the other won't work at the same time. Rami bar Chama, that's the approach that you can take. So Rava was really speaking within Rami bar Chama when he brought in this logic that's how you can explain the Mishnah. But the Gemara is saying that Rava himself could explain the Mishnah in a different way. That the reason why it doesn't work is because it's not a Kiddushin that can lead to a Bia. And it can't lead to intercourse. Because even if the Kiddushin would take effect on both sisters, each one would be forbidden to him. So that's how Rava can learn the Mishnah. That could be the reasoning that doesn't work according to Rava. Okay, now the Gemara will examine Rava's opinion. The Gemara says, Itmar. It was said, Kiddushin she'eng mesurin labia. Kiddushin that cannot lead to intercourse. Abaye Amar havu Kiddushin. Abaye says it's fine, it can still work. Abaye says that that's not a necessary a necessity, that the Kiddushin has to be able to lead to bia for the Kiddushin to take effect. Even Kiddushin that cannot lead to intercourse can still be an effective Kiddushin. Rava Amar lo havu Kiddushin. Rava says no, such a Kiddushin cannot take effect. Amar Rava. Rava then said, Barahina asbrali. Barahina explained to me what the source for this is. Because the verse says, Ki yikach ish isho ba'ala. When a man takes a wife and has relations with her. And that implies, Kiddushin ha-mesurin labia havu Kiddushin. That only a Kiddushin that can lead to relations is a Kiddushin. Kiddushin she'ein mesurin labia lo havu Kiddushin. But a Kiddushin that cannot lead to relations is not Kiddushin. So that's Rava's rule, and that's his source. The Gemara asks from our Mishnah. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Ha-mekadesh isho bita, o isha v'achosa ka'achas. If a man tries to betroth a woman and her daughter, or a woman and her sister at the same time, einan mekudashos. It's not a good Kiddushin. Ha-achas me-isho bita. But if he says, I want to betroth one of you, and he doesn't say which one, maybe he doesn't even know which one, here's Kiddushin, and they take it, and now they've both taken Kiddushin from him, but he's only betrothed to one of them, but nobody knows who. Oh, me'isha v'achosa. Either he does this to a mother and daughter, or to two sisters. Mekudeshes it. The implication from our Mishnah is that would be a good Kiddushin. So, the Gemara is making inference. The Mishnah says that if he tries to do them two at once, then it's not Kiddushin. Mashma, that implies, but if he would try to do one of the two of you, that would be Kiddushin. Ve'amai, but why? Kiddushin she'eng mesurin labia ninhu. That's a Kiddushin that can never lead to bia. Because he doesn't know which of the sisters he's married to. So he can't have relations with either of them, because maybe he's married to the other one. So it's not possible to have intercourse. So it shouldn't be a good Kiddushin in the first place. Tiyufta de Rava. That seems to be a rejection, a refutation of Rava. The Mishnah implies that is Kiddushin. According to Rava, it shouldn't be Kiddushin. So we seem to refute Rava from the Mishnah. So Amar Lecha Rava, so Rava will say to you, V'v'taimech. So according to you, Ema Seifa. He says, let's try it. You're saying that you don't need it to be able to lead to Kiddushin, so let's read the Seifa. Maise b'cha Mishnashim, the end of the Mishnah said, there was an incident with 5 women, Upahen shtei achiyos, and among the 5 were 2 sisters. So there were 2 sisters and 3 other women. V'like dechad kalkal shotim, and a guy went and he collected a basket of figs. V'shel lahen haisa, it belonged to these women apparently. V'shel shviyas haisa, but it was the Shemitah year, so it was ownerless, he was allowed to take it. V'amar, and he took the basket, he gave it to them, he said, Hare kulchem mekudashos li, v'kalkal azvi. He said, all 5 of you are betrothed to me with this basket. Ve'amru chacham, the chachamim said, Ein achiyos mikudashos. The sisters are not mikudashos. There's no kiddushin on the sisters. Implying, achiyos hu de'enon mikudashos. It sounds like the sisters are not betrothed. Hanachrios mikudashos. It sounds like that, but the other 3 women who were not related to each other, that kiddushin worked for them. So the Gemara says, Hey Chidami, what's the case? What did he say? Ilema da'amar kulchem kini. If he said, all of you should become my wife with this basket. So, says Rava, then if it doesn't work for the sisters, it shouldn't work for anybody. It's an all or nothing deal then. If you say all of you, so it should be all or nothing. At v'chamorhu. That's like a guy says, he says, you and the donkey should acquire from me. Now a donkey can't acquire something. So when a person says, you and the donkey should acquire from me, nobody acquires. Rashi says, an example, if a guy says to someone, you and the baby in that woman's womb should each get a present from me. Both acquire a present from me together. So neither of them get anything, because if it doesn't work for him, it doesn't work for him. It's one transaction. So the Gemara is saying, if the guy said, we're making one transaction, all of you will be Mikudashos to me for this basket, well, if it didn't work for the two sisters, it can't work for the other three women. That v'chamor lo kana, you and the donkey, that doesn't work. Right? In this case, the two sisters are like the donkey. They can't acquire. They can't, or transact themselves over. He can't acquire them. So rather, top of the next page, lav de amar lahu. So says Rabbah, he must have said to them, achas mikem, one of you sisters, but he didn't say which one. Meaning, if he said which one, then she's the one, and there's nothing wrong with the Kiddushin. So it must be, he said, one of you is Mikudeshes. Ukitani eng achios Mikudashos. Now, and it says it doesn't work for them. But it's... But this isn't this is possible. In this case, it's possible for them all to be acquired. Because really, technically, he's only being Mekadesh one of the sisters, not both. So everybody that he's trying to be Mekadesh here, he really should be able to be Mekadesh. There's like an outside reason why it's not going to work for one of them. But he has what it takes to be Mekadesh all of them. Really 4 out of 5 of the women that he's trying. Meaning, in the original case, Rava was saying, if he's trying to be Mekadesh all 5 at the same time, that's impossible. You can't be Mekadesh 2 sisters. So there we're left with, the whole thing falls apart. Here, though, he's not being Mekadesh all 5 of them, Rava's saying. He said one of the 2 sisters. So that's possible, to be Mekadesh one of the 2 sisters. There's a problem, we don't know which one he meant, and then it's not going to be able to lead to Bia, so it can't take effect. But in terms of really it should be a viable transaction, and so the Gemara seems to hold that that's fine. That's not going to be a problem. The rest, it will still work for them, and so the remaining 3 women will be Mikudashos, and the 2 sisters can't be. But why not? Rabba's saying the reason is because it's not Masar Leviyah, because it can't lead. Right? The Mishnah says the sisters there's no Kiddushin. That's because it can't lead to a Bia. Can't lead to intercourse. So Rava says the second half of the Mishnah is implying, like me, that a Kiddushin that won't lead to a Bia is not a Kiddushin. So Rayuktani ing achios Mikudashos. It says the 2 sisters are not Mikudashos, they're not betrothed. That seems to be a proof for Rava. So the Gemara says L'Rava Kashya Reisha. So the beginning of the Mishnah is a contradiction to Rava. Abaye Kasha Seifa. And according to Abaye, the second half of the Mishnah is a problem. Because Abaye said that you don't need the Kiddushin to be able to lead to Bia. And the second half of the Mishnah implies, the way that Rava explained how you have to read it, that the second half of the Mishnah implies that you do need a Kiddushin that leads to Bia. So each of them will have to reread the Mishnah. So Abaye Mataritz L'Taimei, Rava Mataritz L'Taimei. Abaye will explain the Mishnah according to his approach, and Rava will explain the Mishnah according to his approach. Abaye metaritz l'taimei. Abaye will explain the Mishnah according to his reasoning. He'll read it like this: Hamakadish isha ubita, o isha v'achosa ke'achas. If a man tries to betroth a woman and her daughter, or a woman and her sister at the same time, einon mikudashos. Doesn't work. You can't do it at the same time. Abaye would go with the reasoning of Rabbah, seemingly. Anything that doesn't work one after the other can't work at the same time. So that doesn't work. But if he says one of you, either gives Kiddushin to the mother and daughter, he says one of you is Mikudeshes to me, and they accept it. Or or he does that to two sisters, one of you is Mikudeshes to me, and they accept it. Mikudeshes, that works. Because Abaye holds, okay, he won't be able to have relations with either of them, because he doesn't know which one, but and it will be a suffix, will be in doubt which one he's married to, but he's married to one of them. Because you don't need a Kiddushin that can lead to a Bia according to Abaye. And then he reads in the following, V'im amar hara'uya lebia. And this will help him read the Seifa. This will help him read the end of the Mishnah. Because he has to be able to read the end of the Mishnah in a way that he was, like Rabbah said, that you have to be able to read the end of the Mishnah in a way that he was only trying to betroth one of the sisters and not both at the same time. So he'll read the end of the Mishnah like this: V'im amar hara'uya lebia tiskadishli, eina mikudeshes. But if he says explicitly, he says, I'm only going to be mikudeshes to one who I can have intercourse with. So, right, according to Rava, that's built in. It has to, for Kiddushin to work, yeah, it has to. But according to Abaye, let's say he said that. At the time of the Kiddushin, he's like, I want the Kiddushin to take effect on one who will be fit for Bia with me. Eina mikudeshes. Then that doesn't work, because neither of them are going to be fit to have intercourse with him, because he doesn't know which one he's married to, and so either of them might be his wife's sister. And then, so even though the Mishnah didn't say that Abaye is reading into the Mishnah, and then we can understand the story. Umaisanami, the incident. Maisanami b'chamesh nashim. And then there was an incident with 5 women, ubahen shtei achios, and there were 2 sisters, and the guy came and collected a basket of figs, and he said this clause, he said to the sisters, the one of you that's fit for Kiddushin, for Bia, will be Mikudeshes to me. So, and he tried to give Kiddushin to one of them, but one of the 2 he didn't specify which one. So there, the sisters are not betrothed, because neither of them are fit for Bia. But the other 3 women will be betrothed, because he wasn't trying to, because again, I'm not so clear on the difference, but apparently when he tried to betroth all 5 at the same time, maybe that's the difference. If he said kulchem, all of you, so then it's not all of you, because the 2 sisters aren't mikudeshes. It must be that he was more specific about it. So he was now I think he's saying one of all of you, I think he's saying. That's how we're reading it, I think. He's saying one of you will be mikudeshes to me. So if he's saying one of them, so we're saying it's definitely not the sisters, because the sisters are not really for Bia. So it's one of the other women. Again, we might not know which one. He could give Kiddushin again, to make sure, but it's definitely not the sisters. That's what the Mishnah is saying. So now, so according to Rava, that's built in, because he doesn't have to specify that they should be Ra'yi for Bia. They should be fit, because that's the rule. You need Kiddushin that's fit for Bia. Abaye has to read that into the Mishnah. He said, I'm being Mekadesh, one of you that will be fit for Bia. The Mishnah says it's not the sisters, they're not fit for Bia. It's got to be one of the other 3 women. The Rava Mataritz L'Tamei. Rava will read the Mishnah according to his reasoning. Hamakadesh achas me'isha ubita. Rava will read his rule right into the Mishnah. If a man tries to be Makadesh, one of either a mother and daughter, but doesn't specify which one. O achas me'isha v'achosa, or one of either a woman and her sister, nase kimi shekidesh isha obito isha v'achosa ka'achas. That's the equivalent of one who betrothed a woman and her daughter, or a woman and her sister at the same time. Because that was the case that the Mishnah actually said, but Rava's rereading the Mishnah, I guess like this. The Mishnah says, Hamakadosh isha obita o isha vachosa ke'achas. A man betroths a woman and her daughter, or a woman and her sister at the same time. Eina mikudashos, they're not mikudashos. Rava's reading that to be one who's mekadesh a woman and her sister, or a woman and her daughter. He's mekadesh one of the two of them. That's ki'achas. That's the same as if he did it at the same time, and it's not good. Because even if you only did one of the two of them, but since you don't know which one, it can't lead to bia, so neither of them are good. It's the equivalent of if you did them at the same time. Veinan mikudashos, and then there's no kiddushin. Umaisanami, and then we have an incident that indicates this. Maisanami b'chamesh nashim, there were 5 women, b'hem shtei achios, and there were 2 sisters among them, blikit echad kachal shalteingim. And the guy gathered a basket of figs, v'amar, and he said, Hare kulchem ve'achas mishtei achios mikudashos li, b'kachal azu. Oh. So here, actually, Rava says that he said, all of you and one of the 2 sisters. So he actually said all 3 of the others, I guess, and one of the 2 sisters. With this basket, the Chachamim ein achios mikudashos. The Chachamim said the sisters are not mikudashos because the women are not mikudashos because they are not fit. The sisters are not mikudashos because they can't lead to bia, but the other ones. The other ones are mikudashos, but Rashi here says the reason why it's not similar to the case of Atva Chamor, of where the guy tries to transact something to a person on a donkey, which it doesn't work, because if it doesn't work for both, it doesn't work for any. But here, he said, all of you and one of the 2 sisters. So Rashi says here that the problem with it still works for the other 3. It's not similar to that because really it should work for one of the 2 sisters. We just don't know which one it is. There's a suffix here and therefore it can't work for any. So it's still a little bit unclear to me how exactly we distinguish why when if you would say all 5 of you, we'd say it doesn't work for any because it doesn't work for 2, it doesn't work for any. Once it's more of once it's this type of case where it really should work for one of the 2 sisters. We just don't know which one. So it ends up that it doesn't work for any, but since it should work for one of them, so that apparently is good enough that the transaction in its entirety can take effect. The other 3 women will be mikudashos, and only the 2 sisters are not. Still needs further explanation, I think. But there we have it. The Gemara will continue this discussion next time, but we have this machlokas between Abaye and Rava. Abaye holds that the Kiddushin does not have to be possible to be followed by a bia, and Rava holds that it does need that. And the Gemara will continue to discuss those 2 opinions.